Hey, what's up everybody? Just coming back with another video here talking about the Magic and Necro. So I've been playing it for a while and I've noticed a lot. Class does really good damage. I would say that on average you're gonna hit between like 3 to 5.5k on a crit with a ricochet. Blast Bones I've hit upwards of about 9k in no CP BGs. And of course, you know, the ultimate does take quite a bit of a setup. The primary issue with their ultimate is that the vast majority of the damage can be blocked. It's real easy as soon as you see it, especially because there's a lot of wind up to it. And of course, it also takes, if you're not using the other morph, ghostly, I forget what's it called, ghostly grasp. If you're not using that, I was testing out this morph to see how it worked with the Spirit Mender or the Intensive Mender, and I find that the other morph for PvP works much better. I don't really recommend this morph, especially because the Skeletal Mage in PvP is useless. It's not worth running. It's primarily because the damage is really low, and of course it targets the nearest player, which doesn't necessarily mean it could be a pet, it could be a tank, it could be, you know, anything that you don't want to hit. Especially when it comes to pets. Primary issue with Empowering Grasp is that it increases this ability. This ability is kind of useless. This ability is already strong, so it's not really worth wasting the 3k Magicka to empower the... Plus it only lasts 5 seconds, and this ability lasts 8 seconds. And since it casts every 2 seconds, you're literally only going to get 2 empowered heals out of this ability. For the other morph to be more useful, I'd say maybe like a little bit of a cost reduction, like 5 or 10%, and then of course it would have to last at least a minimum of 8 seconds so that you actually get the full duration for this ability to really make it worth casting, especially for 3100. I am in 6 light at the moment. The other issue that I have with, of course, with Magic and Necromancer is when you're fighting a DK. Everybody who was like, you know, nerf Wings, Wings OP, Wings are even more overpowered dispatch with a base of 50% mitigation to anything that is ranged, right? So Ricochet automatically gets reduced by 50%, Flame Kench gets reduced by 50%, and so does the Blast Bone, because it is considered a ranged ability. Even though it does AoE damage, it's still considered a ranged ability, so they take 50% less damage just on base with Wings Up. The other issue is that if you're fighting anybody that's blocking, this ability is also blockable. So fighting a DK with Wings Up while he's blocking with a sword and shield, he literally takes no damage. I've hit people on average, you're going to do about 5.5k. If it crits on someone low HP, because of the way I built, and because of, where is it? Death Kneel? Where is it? Yeah. And it increases the critical strike chance against enemies under 25%. So currently, as you see, I'm at 30%. And of course, the reason is that once they're below 25%, you're more likely to crit. And of course, I'm running the Shadow, and then the only thing I'm missing right now on my back bar, because this isn't part of my build, I'm missing from the Sigil Order, I'm missing Race Against Time, or actually Channeled Focus, excuse me, Channeled Acceleration for the extra 10%, so that my base critical damage is 1.73 in light armor, of course. So when you're fighting someone, oh, I should say when you're fighting a DK with Wings and block, it makes it almost impossible for a Magic or Necromancer to do any damage, because literally your light attack, your main spammable, your stun, your burst do no damage, because they can just perma block it. And Wings, at a minimum, even with no mitigation, no gear, is a 50% reduction to this ability. Like I said, be careful what you ask for when you nerf things, because these developers will do some stupid shit. And Wings having a 50% reduction to all range abilities is far too much, especially, you know, if you're running, you know, like I can understand it from the standpoint of Sorks, because Sork just do ridiculous amount of damage. But a lot of the other classes, like for example Magic and Nightblade, if you're doing a Resto Destro, fighting a DK, it's very difficult because you're going to do next to no damage with a base of 50% reduction, especially if you're running Swallow Soul, which you're using for your hot, because the hot is based off of the damage. And of course, if you're fighting a DK and he blocks it and he has wings up, you are literally healing for nothing. The other thing with their ult is that it does require a bit of a setup between you actually using the other morph, the Ghostly Grasp, for the slow and the root, because it either forces them to take all of the damage and just sit there and permablock, or they'll dodge roll, and while they're dodge rolling, they'll get hit by the Glacial as well as the Stalking Blastbone. The other problem with Stalking Blastbone primarily is that there is a bit of a hang up between both the cast time and of course when the ability actually starts to move towards its target. So it will cast and then it will hang and then it will finally move towards its target, and of course that's a long time to wait in PvP, 2.5 seconds, and then on top of that it has a duration of 8 seconds. So if it gets hung up, if it gets rooted or whatnot, you'll see this is a really long time to wait before it actually does damage. It does really good damage, don't get me wrong, but it's a really long time, especially when you're comparing this to either frags or, for example, like Spectral Bow. Yes, it can be cast on rotation, but the problem is that if it gets hung, it's a maximum of 8 seconds that you're going to be waiting for the ability. The ability sits on cooldown. So for example, if you cast the ability and for whatever reason it gets hung up, it gets rooted, it gets stunned, as you can see that's quite a bit of a time. As you can see, there is a cooldown. You'll see the timer right there. The other issue is that sometimes it's a little bit difficult to weave. It's not like as easily animation canceled sometimes. I'm not sure why. I'm really used to animation canceling, and sometimes I just find if I'm animation canceling too fast, and I will hit the ability and bar swap, and that doesn't go off. Between that and of course when that happens, plus the cast time, that's a really long time to wait for some sort of burst, especially because the ability can be blocked and then it does next to no damage. That's my primary problem with the ability, is that it can be blocked. If they want to reduce the damage, that would make sense slightly, maybe like a 10% or 15% nerf, especially because it doesn't really work all that well from range. It gets easily hung up, it can easily be destroyed, it can be targeted, it can be slowed, it can be rooted, it can be stunned. If you cast the ability and then the ability and someone casts a negate, the ability, the summon will just stand there because it's stunned and then negate. If someone drops like wall of elements, like the ice morph, or drops any sort of slow on the ground, it will affect the ability as well. So all that does is, while yes, the ability is designed to do more damage the longer it takes, sometimes if it doesn't get there, then it's wasted. It rarely happens, but when it does, it's quite annoying. I think it's primarily because a lot of the other classes, for example Magicasauric, just do far too much damage in comparison, especially because they have Curse, which acts kind of like a dot, and unfortunately Necromancer doesn't have a very useful one. Whichever morph of siphoning that you're running is kind of useless for PvP. This is kind of useful if you're, for example, like running on an ice build and you're dropping Ice Path and you're trying to LOS, like you're playing like a Warden, like an Ice Warden, but it really doesn't work all that well, especially because of how small it is. It's only 6 meters. Like I said in my previous video, the most abilities, for example, you know, like if you're running Uppercut, I think even if you're a DK running Sword and Shield, you have a minimum of like 8 to 7 meters, so you can literally stand on the outside of it and still be attacked, and of course the other person is taking no damage. The other main ability that is designed to do a lot of damage, of course, is the other is the Mystic Siphon or the Detonating Siphon. This is entirely useless. It has a huge tooltip, as you can see, unbuffed, and of course missing a lot of passives. It's got an 18k tooltip, but it's absolutely useless because it's entirely too small. My other issue is that the class is too reliant on corpses. Sometimes Summoner's Armor, even when you cast it, typically if you cast it after the 10-second duration, or I should say outside of the 10-second timer, as you can see right there, I'll cast it, it'll redrop a corpse that I can use to heal myself. Sometimes the corpses will bug out a little bit, or sometimes your ability will show that it's highlighted, like you're able to use it, and then you press the ability and nothing happens. The other issue is that waiting for the blast bones to go off to acquire a corpse to use to heal yourself, or to use another ability, for example the Bitter Harvest or morph, whichever morph that you're using, or some of the other abilities that will consume to do more damage, for example the Grave, the Boneyard, that also will do more damage if it consumes a corpse. If Stalking Blast gets hung, or for whatever reason it lasts the full duration, you have to wait a minimum of 8 seconds just to get a corpse to use some of your other abilities, kind of like Mortal Coil. For the most part, I wish this ability was 360 degrees and make it exactly like Bitter Harvest, so that it pulls literally from anywhere within 15 meters. You know, you can make it so that this, since this is designed for healing. The other issue is that, of course, if you kill something and then of course you're pulling and then you need to get a little bit of line of sight, if you line of sight it immediately disappears, so you kind of lose the healing, and it is fairly expensive at $28.50, especially since it's designed to last 12 seconds. Despite the lack of mobility, that can be made up with the Sigil Order ability. I would say that if DKs didn't have wings, and like I said in my previous video, there's absolutely no reason not to go Sword and Shield on a Magicka DK this patch, because primarily between wings and the reduction from block, you take next to no damage fighting ranged characters, like a ranged Sorc or ranged Magicka Nightblade, or of course a Necro, because base block is 50%, and then whatever the remaining damage is reduced by wings, and then of course, and that's before mitigation. So it's like you have all of these different damage reductions on DK now that are making the class very strong, which I knew was going to happen. That's what I said in my last video, and it is coming to fruition. When I play Mad DK, I play Mad DK Sword and Shield, and that's something that I've noticed, that they're very strong when it comes to blocking, and there's really no point because so many Magicka builds run ranged, and DKs are very strong, especially in Battlegrounds, where you really don't have the most amount of mobility, and of course your HP is a little bit lower, and there's a fucking shit ton of Magic DKs in Battlegrounds. I would say to balance Magicka Necro, I would think they would need to utilize their dot somehow, because literally not being able to utilize these two abilities to the fullest really hurts the class damage-wise in a 1v1 against a competent player, but especially against either Wardens who can just keep up shimmering, and literally every single ability that you're going to be using is a ranged ability, and all you're going to do is feed the Malt or Mad DKs, or if you're fighting a Cloaking Nightblade. Like, most of these abilities are fairly useless outside of the Stalking Blastbone, because it will pause and then it will reveal the Nightblade. Well, it will chase the Nightblade, I should say, once it is cast. As you can see, you can kill something before the Blastbone even finishes its 2.5-second animation and begins to move. So I'm not sure exactly how ZeniMax is going to go about fixing this. Again, the class is very strong in terms of it being able to do damage. Ricochet hits hard, without a doubt, especially if you are boosting your critical damage and your critical percentage to take advantage of Death Kneel for both healing and damage. On a rare occasion, Blast Bones will get hung up, but for the most part, it does really good damage. An easy way to fix it is to make it untargetable, and to decrease the cast time to either like 2 seconds or 1.5 seconds, and reduce the, for example, the secondary portion of it to maybe like no more than 30% extra damage if you're casting it from range, because you're able to cast it a little bit more reliable, and it does really good damage. I will say that. I think if they were to fix that, it would make Magic and Necromancers a little bit more competitive in Battlegrounds. But at the same time, I'm still missing a few of my passives in both my my Destro and my Resto. I'm not fully maxed out, as you can see here, and then I also don't have all of my light armor passives. I do have my heavy and some of my medium, and of course I'm still missing Undaunted. So I can't give a full estimate. I can say that it does hit hard, and of course by the end of this week I should have all of my passives and my Undaunted, and I'll be able to give a much better opinion. I will say that as long as you can keep up Intensive Mender, and as long as you can keep up Mortal Coil, Magic and Necromancer, even when outnumbered, I was fighting against 3 Magicka DKs, literally rotating Molten on me with leaps, and it took quite a bit for them to kill me. I think it ate 2 leaps and multiple, 6k empowered Molten whips, and I was still able to stay alive as long as I had my Mortal Coil up, and of course my Intensive Mender, and of course, and I was able to keep them debuffed and slowed with Empowering Grasp. What I will say is that in fighting DKs, you're going to struggle, because most of your abilities are going to be so dramatically reduced that you're going to struggle to do damage against them, even with ult. Again, if you're running a block DK, it's real easy to mitigate the vast majority of the ult damage, especially since the only way that you're able to CC a DK is with a Flame Clench, because Totem is kind of useless to use for the CC because of the duration. When you need to CC someone immediately, waiting 2 seconds on top of waiting another 2.5 seconds to CC and do damage in a fast-paced game like this is just not possible, and it makes this ability next to useless outside of PvE for just the damage mitigation. And it's a real shame, because Necromancer could really use this ability to mitigate the damage, because it lacks the ability to hold its ground somewhat to the potential that it could. That extra 8% mitigation would go a long way, especially when you're fighting classes like DK that can rely on blocking far better than a Magic and Necromancer can, where they can utilize their stamina and still block cast some of the abilities, because you're not going to want to do that, as you can see, because you're going to miss out on the weave, which is really important for the extra damage. What I would say to make this ability worthwhile, especially because it's not that big, it's 6 meters. What I would say to make it a little bit more useful is that it pulses for at least half of the duration. So when you cast the ability, it starts to pulse CC, like an AoE Fear, so that anybody that comes in it within 4 seconds automatically gets CC'd, instead of you having to wait 4 seconds, or if you're having to wait 2 seconds for the CC. Although this would help when Magic and Necromancer is surrounded by multiple opponents, and it's not forced into basically wasting its stamina to block for 2 seconds during that time. And of course, it will be able to take advantage of the damage mitigation. But for the most part, I find in terms of healing, Like, you really don't need a damage shield on Magic and Necromancer, just because their healing is so strong. Just need to find a way to make Blast Bones a little bit more reliable, and the class, in my opinion, would be really solid in being able to trade. Between that and then speeding up the cast time on Ricochet compared to like a Sork using Crushing Shock, it is noticeably slower because of the travel time. Let's see if we can find a mob over here. Here we go. So between Crushing Shock, you can see that that's quite a bit of time to wait in comparison to, I don't even know if I have Crushing Shock. I don't even have it. But Crushing Shock hits much faster. It does a little bit less damage, especially the third cast. And so maybe that's the trade-off, is that you get the extra damage plus the extra critical damage. I would like to see it sped up a tiny bit, because it is a little slow. Where is this thing? Just saw something I could target. Anyways, it is a little slow when you're trying to trade, especially against a Magicka Sork that has access to Crushing Shock, Curse, and then Frags, which is a much better combo than using, you know, Ricochet into a Flame Reach into a Blast Bone. I will say I was able to quickly blow up a Sork that wasn't paying attention with literally a heavy attack, Ricochet, Flame Crunch, and I started off with the Blast Bones, and I immediately see him and at half health, and it hit him for like 9.5k, the Blast Bones, and it blew him up instantly. Of course, that is a very rare occurrence, but trading a Sork who's using shields, and of course has a better kit for dealing damage, and in my opinion, of course, has better sustain, because Necromancer sustain is okay. My food buff fell off. I think I'm sitting around 1k health recovery with a pot, a little over 1800 Magicka recovery, and about 12 something with my stamina recovery. And of course, but on my Magicka Sork, I would say I sit equally the same in terms of recovery, slightly better recovery. The only thing I don't have is, of course, the max health. But I'm running Tri-Stat food, whereas on my Necromancer I'm running Clockwork. So it's like I do have a little bit more max magic and more stam and more HP on my Sork, while maintaining the same amount of Magicka recovery. Actually, I have better recovery because I sit just slightly over 2k, especially because I use the shield morph that gives you the extra 10%. So it's like, and of course that's with the summon up, right? So that's the extra 200 that you get. That is, I'm talking about, that is with the summon up. So I'm sitting at like 1250. Of course, with Clockwork, I'm sitting at 18 and change, and then my health recovery is like a little over 1k. But in terms of the kit, in terms of the rotation, I would say it's definitely much better on Magicka Sork. And if you're fighting a Warden, it's still going to be difficult, because between Shulk, Crushing Shock, they're using Clench as well, and between Shulk and Bird Spam, if they were using Bird Spam over Crushing Shock, they're typically going to do a bit more damage, especially because, again, with Shimmering, you can mitigate a lot of the damage that Magicka Necromancer unfortunately uses. So between the trading with the other magic classes, between like Magicka Nightblade with Cloak, between Shimmering, and between DK, and between Sork Shields, Necromancer does seem to struggle a little bit, but we'll see how it feels once I'm maxed out. Anyway, I'll be back. Feel free to take a look at the Battle of the Builds website for anybody looking for Battleground builds. Here we go. I did update the Nightblade the one that I play right now, and of course also my Necromancer build there, my hybrid build, my Magicka build, as well as my my stamina build. Feel free to take a look at that at battleofthebuild.com. Thanks for everybody who got to watch. Feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And I'll be back. Have a great day, and God bless.